Hi, I'm Phil. I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor and a trauma therapist. Today I'm going to talk about some of the reasons behind why we might miss or ignore the red flags that would identify certain people as not being good partner choices for us. So, there are going to be a number of reasons why we ignore these warning signs, and not all of them are typically going to be conscious, not for everyone. But there are going to be red flags that we are conscious of that we do choose to ignore, and this might be because we're either being gaslighted or manipulated by someone, so we go against what our body or mind is telling us. Or we just don't want to heed the warning of the red flag because there's something that we want or hope to get from the person that our body is warning us about. So let's first describe what a red flag might be. Well, we could say that it's a feeling or a cognitive insight into a negative element of someone's character that might be emotionally, physically, or psychologically harmful or unhealthy for us to be around. And these negative elements, they may or may not be in their awareness because most of us tend to respond to the world impulsively with all of the tools we've got. So we don't go around analyzing every interaction to see if we should be doing something else in this moment. I mean, how many people will be doing that? Which means that some people's impulses will be telling them to act in ways that might be physically, emotionally or psychologically damaging for others. And this is because they simply lack remorse and they don't have access to enough guilt and shame in their process to help them challenge or amend their behaviors. So people who don't mask or hide these negative traits will usually be presenting with loads of red flags that should be relatively easy to identify. So they're likely to be easy to anger, quick to try to take some control in the relationship. They're probably going to be very vague, so you'll never be quite sure when you're going to see them again or how they feel about you or what's going on. They might also turn up late without apologies, be self-centered, make everything about them, be derogatory about lots of people they've known in the past. These are all real obvious red flags, which we'd like to think that we'd pick up on. But if these people have learned over time to mask or hide these traits by presenting a false self, then to help us see through the ruse, then we're going to need to rely heavily on our embodied reaction to them, as well as what our other senses are picking up on. And this internal sensing of what's in front of us is what a lot of people have trouble with when it comes to missing red flags. And there are a number of reasons for this. So one might be because they just simply don't trust their stomach enough to listen to it when it's sending them uncomfortable feelings about the person they're in contact with. Another might be because they don't recognize the feeling in their stomach as being a warning or a threat at all, because something from their past has invited them to be in denial of this experience. And I'll explain a little bit more in a minute because this is a major factor in red flag avoidance. Or they might convert the feeling of fear that they're experiencing in this person's company into an adrenaline junkie type response and feel excited by the thought of being involved with this person rather than scared that they might harm them in some way. So, to get a better sense uh, uh, of sort of building your red flag detector, we need to better understand what our body is doing with our emotions in response to others. Because if we're not picking up on red flags or we're ignoring them, then that means that we're not able to comprehend or even trust how our body is reacting to others. And that makes us very vulnerable. So I'll discuss some of the reasons why this might be happening now. So if we were brought up by controlling parents, then as adults, we might not see the traits of people with controlling or manipulative personality styles as being red flags because that's what we're used to. It's just normal for us to be around those types of people. That's nothing untoward to us. And we've typically adapted through childhood to manage and survive that situation by appeasing our parents or by dissociating or blocking off some of the harmful effects of their behaviours upon us, just so we can feel a modicum of happiness instead of the shame, guilt, and fear that would be the more dominant experience in that environment. And this is the reason why a lot of people who've suffered abuse or neglect find themselves in relationships with people who will treat them similarly because they just cannot see their parents' traits or the red flags that point to these traits in new people because they've been blinkered by their historical experience to ignore and normalize certain personality traits that should be their biggest priority to avoid. But if we're in denial, the red flags just aren't going to be flying. So if we were brought up by a parent who had narcissistic traits, for example, then the same thing might occur. We might not pick up narcissism as being a red flag because it's what we're used to being around. And because our process has adapted over time to cope in the company of narcissism, that means as adults that we might naturally just adapt to appease people with this process. So in a sense, we might not see narcissism as a red flag, and the fantasy of eventually getting a new narcissistic person to love us might override all of those red flags that should be telling us that we always fail with this type of person. So what we're saying is that we aren't necessarily going to see inappropriate or unethical behaviors as red flags in people if our parents also possess some of those traits, if that was normal for us to be around that growing up. Some people will have taken the opposite route, though, and will be very sensitive to picking up the traits of their parents in others and avoiding them. And they will avoid them like the plague, but not everybody adapts to survive their childhood situations in the same way. Now, I'm not saying here that everyone who misses red flags has bad parents, not at all. But what they might have had were parents who were maybe traumatized, avoidant, abandoned as children, highly stressed, abuse victims, and the list goes on, which means that their parents weren't necessarily deliberately treating them badly. It's just that they may have been limited in just how much they could manage their psychological issues while bringing up their children. And their personality style will have factored a lot into how they managed life in general too. And personality styles usually result from experience, which means that their parents' character flaws were influenced by their own childhoods. So in a sense, our parents' survival traits are bound to influence ours. So what we've normalized in childhood can be a major reason why we miss red flags. But if we think of it logically, however we adapted to cope with our early situation, before we went into denial or before we dissociated, we will have felt angry and scared around the behaviors of the people we were adapting around. But we might have switched this fear and this anger off or converted them into different emotions such as guilt and shame, because fear and anger were unbearable to manage or considered dangerous emotions to do because the parents wouldn't tolerate or wouldn't look after us if we were in a scared position or an angry position or a sad position. And that fear and anger is usually still held in our body, which means that if we can access that, then we're going to have the best red flag detector ever, because no one is going to get close to us if our anger tells us very clearly that we're being manipulated and our fear tells us that the person we're talking to is dangerous. This is why raising awareness of your own process is important if you want to get better at recognizing red flags. You already have the capacity to do this in your body. It's just that you more than likely do not have enough access to all of your feeling senses to activate a better red flag radar. To simplify this, it's useful to understand which of our emotions we prioritize. Get a sense of this within yourself. So people who feel a lot of guilt tend to struggle with anger as it makes them feel more guilty. And some people who are very shame driven may only feel fear when it relates to shame. So they might be more scared of being judged by someone than physically hurt by them. So people with a lot of guilt in their process are likely to miss red flags that would make a lot of people angry because their anger is just not going to be there in their process. So they're likely to be much more tolerant of bad or disrespectful behaviors. So if their partner turns up late for their fourth date, like they have on all of their previous dates, then the guilty person is likely to give them the benefit of the doubt or believe any old sob story. Because anger, which would be an appropriate thing to feel in this situation when you've been repeatedly let down, just won't be prioritized. They just won't be easily able to put themselves before others, and they'll quickly forget the other's indiscretion and get on with the evening. Someone with a healthy access to anger might decide that this person they're seeing is just not making the effort to be respectful and use the feeling generated by that red flag to make a choice on what they're going to do moving forward. And people with a shame driven process who have a very vulnerable ego are likely to be fixating more on the person liking them or being good enough for that person to like, rather than how damaging or dangerous that person might be for them to be around. Because a fear of physical or psychological harm just isn't going to be there to warn them. It's not going to be prioritized over shame, which is also going to be overriding their anger as an option in most of their situations too. So a controlling or manipulative partner might subtly at first make comments on your looks, if you're a shamed person, might first make comments on your looks or your weight or your job, just little snippets that start to erode away your self-esteem. And because the shamed person's self-image is the most important thing to them, then their shame is going to deepen in response to this, and they might start to work harder to get validation from the other. So their ego can stabilize a little in response to some positive self-image. So anger's just not going to come to their defense as a red flag in response to their partner's put downs and covert devaluations. And this is going to make them incredibly vulnerable to manipulation. So if you're going to upgrade your red flag radar, then you need to be identifying which emotions are most dominant in your process and which emotions you shy away from or avoid completely. Because if you can raise awareness in these areas, then you might increase the likelihood that you're going to feel angry or scared around people who you should feel angry or scared around. And if you listen to your stomach at that point, it will be using these emotions to tell you not to spend too much time around them. It just won't feel comfortable. You just won't want to be there. So, in effect, if you can allow yourself to feel what you should be feeling rather than what you've adapted to feel or what you're in denial of, then your capacity to see through the false selves and the masks that people might present to you is going to be massively increased. Other reasons we might avoid red flags might be because we think that this time I can have a relationship with someone like this and make it work, which might be a belief that has taken you into similar relationships before that have also not worked out. And this pattern usually happens with people who spent a lot of time in childhood trying to appease or get it right for their family so they'd be happy with them or loved or accepted. A similar reason might be because we believe that we have better boundaries now, so we'll be able to cope with our usual choice of partner and better manage our reactions to them. So we'll go with the same type of person because we're thinking we can be strong, we can manage them now. But if you think about this, you're still trying to attach to people who are maybe not healthy for you. Whether you have boundaries or not, that doesn't mean that they're going to change. Some might, of course, but a lot won't. And how often are you going to keep taking that chance? Another reason where a red flag experience might help us might be if we're seduced at the beginnings of a relationship to believe that we have more power in the relationship than we actually have. Because being seduced in this way can be very intoxicating for people who've had little to no power in childhood. And the trouble is that once you've been fed this for a while, it can become like an addiction. It can become a need. And of course, then once your partner has got you addicted to this sense of power or control, they're going to start to pull it away, which is going to make you chase what you had the day before, which reverses the power role back to their favor. A healthy red flag reaction to this situation would be your body experiencing a little overwhelmed, smothered, or uncomfortable around the level of attention you're getting from this person at first. So, in effect, the red flag would be a physical feeling of the insincerity around how hard the other is trying to empower you. The red flag would not have you trust in this. The same could be said for people who are very good at mirroring and being exactly the partner they think you need. Because if you have healthy access to all of your emotions, then this red flag is going to be telling you and giving you a sense that this person is too good to be true. The red flag will help us to believe that. We won't just cognitively know it, we'll just feel it. So, honesty, funnily enough, can also be something we need to consider as a red flag. Because if we meet someone and they tell us that they're a nightmare in relationships or that we wouldn't be able to cope with them in a relationship or that they have a terrible temper, we need to listen to this and hear it as a red flag and not just admire them for their honesty. We need to listen and hear their truth and decide if that's what we want to deal with later on, not go into a sort of place of denial thinking, oh, but they won't be like that around me because I understand them. No, they're telling us what they are. The same would apply if a new partner speaks candidly about the affairs they've had in the past or how badly they've behaved. Listen to what is being said because they're telling you very truthfully that they're capable of immoral acts. We might feel special that they confide in us and believe that they wouldn't do that to us. But if they do, they might just say that they told you what they were like to begin with, which removes all responsibility on their part. So sometimes honesty does need to be considered as a red flag. Listen to what's being said. So overall, what I'm saying is that yes, we need to get better at recognizing the obvious red flags and putting boundaries in with ourselves when we feel the pull to ignore those red flags. But it's more important to develop some self-awareness around your personality style and how you adapted as a child might have limited your physical reactions to certain red flags. That would be very obvious to people who have access to all of their emotions at healthy levels because every emotion is important, even the ones that feel bad, because those emotions make us feel bad for a reason. And those reasons are there to either keep us safe or keep us on ethical ground. Anger's in our process so we can protect ourselves. Fear is there to warn us of danger. Sadness is there to release grief from our bodies. And guilt and shame are there to regulate societal behaviours and improve our capacity to connect to others. Because humans are biologically a communal species that survive better in groups. That may not be as relevant as it once was today, but you can guarantee our ancestors will have needed the safety of groups or tribes. So, looking within yourself and identifying which of your emotions are not helping you when you make partner choices is the key. Because if you can access healthy levels of fear and anger, then your red flag radar it's not going to be going far wrong. It's not going to be experiencing too much guilt and shame, because that's going to be getting in the way. That's going to make you amend your choices into ways that may not be healthy for you. Well, hopefully that was useful for you. And if you'd like me to explain any elements of it in a little more detail, just drop me a line in the comments. And thanks for listening, and thanks for watching, and goodbye.